It is 10 a.m. in Kiev, 5 p.m. in Sydney, and 4 on a Wednesday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gun-young. This is ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. South Korea is wasting little time bolstering its air surveillance system after discovering 3 probable North Korean drones on its territory in recent weeks. Seoul wants to buy some seriously advanced radar systems from Israel that should help the South Korean military detect any unwanted visitors in the sky. ARIRANG News' Connie Kim starts us off.
The discoveries of 3 suspected North Korean drones in less than a month on South Korean soil has prompted Seoul to take action. The government said Wednesday that it would be adopting Israel's tactical air surveillance radar system. A government source said an emergency budget of around $19 million will be drawn up to purchase 10 low-altitude radars this year. The RPS-42 radars will be deployed at key government facilities, including the presidential office and on the West Coast next year. The South's current radars aren't capable of detecting the North's small-sized drones, but the newly adopted Israeli system is. It can detect all types of aerial objects as small as half a meter in size within a 30-kilometer radius and has an altitude range of 10 kilometers. The Korean military has been under fire for allowing the unmanned aerial vehicles infiltrate its airspace, which represents a national security threat. In another effort to boost the nation's military readiness, Korea has asked the U.S. Defense Security Cooperation Agency to purchase more than 100 advanced missiles. The agency said Tuesday that it had notified Congress of a possible sale of missiles, equipment, and parts to Seoul. Korea plans to buy 76 Sidewinder Block II all-up-round missiles and 32 captive air training missiles at a cost of nearly $100 million to help counter threats from North Korea. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
And South Korea's plans to beef up its air surveillance capabilities don't end with the purchase of those Israeli radars. South Korean Defense Minister Kim Jin briefed the Parliamentary Defense Committee on this Wednesday over the government's plans to counter suspected North Korean drones. Now, in addition to buying advanced low-altitude surveillance radars and anti-aircraft guns, the military is also considering providing financial rewards to anyone who reports spotting a drone. The defense chief also said the military will deploy 4 unmanned aerial aircraft for reconnaissance purposes in western seaborder areas. Now, up in the north, North Korea is holding its first session of the 13th Supreme People's Assembly on this Wednesday. The meeting, which is equivalent to a parliamentary session, will give the world a better idea about the changes in the regime's policies and power structure. ARIRANG News' Hwang Seung-hee reports.
North Korea's 13th Supreme People's Assembly session got underway in Pyongyang on Wednesday. It marks the first session of the rubber stamp parliament elected under Kim Jong-un's leadership. As widely expected, the young Kim was represented as the chairman of the powerful National Defense Commission, according to the state-run Korean Central News Agency. Other agenda items at the meeting include appointing officials for government posts and deliberating on this year's budget plan. The first session of the country's highest legislative body is an occasion to find out who's in and who's out of North Korea's ruling circle. And speculation is that a major reshuffle could be in the works. Sources say Prime Minister Park Bong-ju, the country's economic policymaker, could be sacked to take responsibility for failed economic reform plans. 86-year-old figurehead President Kim Young-nam may step down after 15 years in office. Possible successors to the positions include Kim Yang-gun, top policymaker in charge of inter-Korean matters, and Vice Premier Kang Seok-ju. The meeting comes as North Korea has been raising tensions on the Korean peninsula with a series of missile launches, artillery shellings, and threats to conduct another nuclear test. All eyes are on what kind of a message the regime will send to South Korea and the United States. Hwang Seung-hee, ARIRANG News.
Well, over in Washington, in South Korea, the U.S. and Japan, who have taken a tough stance against North Korea's provocations, upped the pressure on Pyongyang this week. However, the different political agendas of the so-called 6 parties involved in talks to denuclearize the North seem to have become a stumbling block to progress. Choi Sun has more.
Earlier this week, the chief nuclear negotiators of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan were united in pressuring North Korea not to carry out a fourth nuclear test.
It would be a direct provocation to the international community and a grave threat to global peace and stability. We, along with the international community, will make sure North Korea pays for it.
The three nations, together with China and Russia, have tried to denuclearize the North for more than a decade, but each participating country's political interests have gotten in the way. Behind the three parties' unified voice, Seoul and Washington reportedly demanded Tokyo's transparency in its recently revived two-way dialogue with Pyongyang. That's because the three allies have maintained that they will not resume dialogue with North Korea unless it takes steps to end its nuclear program, and that bilateral arrangements with North Korea must not undermine this principle. The Abe administration, however, recently opened government-level contacts with Pyongyang, seeking explanations about North Korea's abductions of Japanese nationals during the 1970s and 80s. Any progress on North Korea's nuclear issue requires cooperation from its traditional ally China, which wants unconditional dialogue resumption with Pyongyang. But the U.S. and China appear to be more obsessed with military rivalry in the Asia-Pacific region. The two global powers have recently been engaged in a war of words over China's territorial claims in the region. With cracks surfacing and relations among nations involved in containing North Korea's nuclear ambition, priority may well be bearing their differences. 최유선, 아리랑 뉴스.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Gon-yong. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Open an era of trust and peace on the Korean Peninsula. Speaking at the annual national...
China and the United States have faced off over Beijing's territorial claims in the East China Sea. While Washington's defense chief spoke out against China's increasing assertiveness in the region, his Chinese counterpart warned his country was prepared to use its military if it feels threatened. Our Yudian reports.
In a clear display of the underlying tensions between the two world superpowers, the defense chiefs of China and the United States on Tuesday exchanged some sharp words on territorial disputes. U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel denounced Beijing's declaration of an air defense zone over the East China Sea that includes the disputed islands known as Diaoyu in China and Senkaku in Japan.
Every nation has a right to establish air defense zones, but not a right to do it unilaterally. That adds to tensions, misunderstandings, and could eventually add to and eventually get to dangerous conflict.
Hagel added that in case of conflict with Japan, the United States will protect its ally as laid out by its treaty obligations. China's defense minister fired back, saying Beijing stands ready to assemble its military to protect its territory.
I'd like to reiterate that the territorial sovereignty issue is China's core interest. On this issue, we will make no compromise, no concession, no trading, not even a tiny bit of violation is allowed.
Chang also said the U.S. should not be permissive or supportive of Tokyo. China-U.S. relations have been under strain since Beijing unilaterally declared its air defense zone last year. Prior to his trip to Beijing, Defense Secretary Hagel expressed support for Japan's claims to the disputed territory in the East China Sea. Yudian, ARIRANG News.
The U.S. issued a stark warning on Tuesday that Moscow could be orchestrating another Crimea-style intervention in eastern Ukraine. Now, this after pro-Russian forces cemented their control of a government building in the city of Donetsk, and there were claims that in Lugansk, protesters had taken up to 60 people hostage. Against this backdrop, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has suggested holding a four-way talks with the EU, Russia, and Ukraine. Here's our Kwon Soo-ah with the latest on the worsening crisis.
With no immediate end to the Ukraine crisis in sight, senior officials from the EU, the US, Russia and Ukraine will try to find common ground in four-way talks next week, likely in Europe. It will represent the first such meeting since the crisis began. The talks were suggested by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry as he accused Russian forces of stirring up separatist turmoil in the eastern part of Ukraine. He told Moscow to back down or face tougher new sanctions that would target Russia's banking, energy, mining and arms sectors. NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen warned Russia too, saying a further intervention in Ukraine would be a, quote, historic mistake, and that it would lead to a further international isolation for Russia. The crisis worsened over the weekend when pro-Russian activists seized regional government buildings in 3 eastern Ukrainian cities. On Tuesday, Ukraine's Interior Ministry said it had detained some 70 people during an anti-terrorist operation in Kharkiv, but that protesters are still in control of a state security building in Luhansk. He says they are armed and holding around 60 people hostage. Protesters occupying a government building in Donetsk have declared a People's Republic of Donetsk and are planning a referendum to join the Russian Republic by May 11th. It's a potential powder keg, as the polarization of pro-Russians and pro-Ukrainians in the 3 cities is greater than it was in Crimea, which Russia annexed a month ago. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
Now on to the latest developments in the search for the missing aircraft Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. There is hope once again as search teams have picked up new signals that may be consistent with the black box flight data recorder. Australian authorities heard 2 separate signals on 2 separate occasions Tuesday. The vessel had first detected pings on Saturday in the southern Indian Ocean. Officials are growing more confident that they are now looking in the right area. Search teams are in a race against time as the batteries of the flight recorder could run out any day or even any minute now. And the Boeing 777 disappeared on March 8th, carrying 239 people on board. The search on Wednesday includes 11 military planes, 4 civilian aircraft, and 14 ships. Korea's March job figures are out, and the Korean job market seems to be picking up ahead of steam. It added roughly 650,000 jobs last month compared to the previous year. Statistics Korea said Wednesday that the total number of employed people in Korea in March stood at over 25 million, and the agency attributed the rise to the steady economic recovery the nation witnessed after a long-term slump. Job creation, however, slowed from the previous month's 835,000 gain, and that, of course, was the largest on-year job growth since March 2002. Meanwhile, the financial health of Korea's major conglomerates has improved drastically over the past 10 years. Local market researcher CEO Score said Wednesday that the debt ratio of Korea's top 30 large enterprises dropped to around 83% last year, which is nearly 20 percentage points lower than in 2004, when the figure stood at over 100%. The improved financial health of the bottom 20 large companies of these 30 was especially pronounced. Now, they saw their debt ratio drop by around 25 percentage points. Korean consumers are turning more and more to the internet to purchase products from abroad, and understandably so, as they can get much better deals. And to reverse the trend and level the playing field for consumers, the Korean government is stepping in. Our Song Ji-sun reports.
Import prices of these products are around $10, but the very same product on the shelf of a department store carries a price tag 4 times higher. That's the case with many imported products, after distribution margins and marketing prices are taken into account. To provide consumers with sufficient information and to stabilize prices, the government has added the import prices of 10 industrial products, like wine, strollers, and lipstick, to its publicly available list. The import price list previously included 60 food products. The Customs Office said the cheaper the import price of an item, the more expensive its retail price became, as a monopoly among domestic distributors meant no price competitiveness. This gap between the import and retail prices has led more and more Korean consumers to directly purchase products from overseas over the years, mostly online. Direct overseas shopping tripled from 2010 to $1 billion last year. The beefed-up import price list is only one change the government is making to support consumers. At an economic ministerial meeting on Wednesday, Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok announced that the customs clearance process would be sped up to allow consumers to claim their purchased items more quickly. They will also be able to return their products purchased overseas with less fuss and get tax refunds more easily thanks to simplified procedures. The government will also encourage free market competition among importers by facilitating parallel imports, all part of its goal to lower the retail prices of imported consumer goods by up to 20% over the next 3 years. 송지선, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now, overall global smartphone shipments are expected to top 1 billion for the first time ever this year. U.S.-based research firm Strategy Analytics estimates about 1.2 billion smartphones will be sold around the world in 2014, which is up more than 20% from the previous year. By region, the Asia-Pacific region is forecast to take up more than half of the global smartphone market, with almost 650 million unit sales, followed by North America, Western Europe, and Central and Latin America. The global smartphone market has grown tenfold in just 7 years, and with the market becoming saturated, the report expects much slower growth in the future. Now, Africa and the Middle East are forecast to post the largest growth rate of 160% by 2020, which is much higher than the overall rate of 38%. They are called Centers for Limitless Imagination. In line with the Park Geun-hye administration's drive for building a creative economy, the Science Ministry plans to inject 2.5 billion won, that is roughly $2.4 million, to set up 70 of these idea factories across the nation. 7 pilot centers have been up and running since August last year, and more than 85% of some 10,000 visitors have found them helpful. Now, the government plans to establish more than 200 centers by 2017. 3D printers especially were the most sought-after items at these centers. The government says it will reflect the needs and make sure each center is equipped with a 3D printer. Experts that can help students develop creativity will also be available at these centers. Now, Korean society has gone through dramatic changes in recent years, including the increased status and participation of women in the workforce. But we're not quite up to par on the global standard. The Economist last month created a glass ceiling index to show where women have the best chances of equal treatment at work. Korea and Japan found themselves at the bottom of the index. I mean, too few women have jobs, too few senior managers or board members are women, and the pay gaps are wide. Korea at 37% represents the largest in the OECD. And right on cue, making the business headlines today, Korea's leading companies are sluggish in hiring more women. Now, if that is the case, it's definitely worth looking into. For that, we have Dr. Kim Byung-ju, the head of KLMP Consulting and our regular commentator on this program. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
So these Korea's leading companies, sluggish in hiring more women.
Right.
What is this report all about?
Well, basically, you know, these undergrad students that I teach, many of them, they want to go to these Korea's leading corporations together with public corporations and government offices and so on. And when they hear this news that Korea's leading corporations are slower in hiring women than men, they would be upset. They will be thinking about equal opportunities and all that kind of stuff. But these are the numbers that you're seeing on the screen right here. Between 1220 and 1213, Korea's top 10 chaebols, they increase hiring of men by 3.5%. Those are the total numbers, by the way. Look at those differences in magnitude. Already they have 3.5 times, 3.5 times more men working for these top corporations already. And so probably the need, according to the theory, they'll need to hire women faster and more. But the thing is, ratio here, the increase between those 2 years, 2012 and 2013, women's side, it lags behind big time, almost like half of the increase ratio. That is upsetting a lot of people who especially believe actually female students are doing better in schools, which I see as the fact as well. They're usually filling the top portion of the graduating classes in terms of their performance and school scores and all that. So they're saying this is a problem. And also, we are, in addition, hearing speculations that maybe women are going to more of this non-permanent positions rather than permanent positions and so on. So a lot of points about which people would be unhappy about.
Right. I mean, just to touch upon what you just said, the government really has been emphasizing the need for these firms to hire more permanent workers rather than non-permanent employees in these groups. What is the portion of non-permanent employees in these groups?
Well, it really varies depending on which groups you're talking about. Let's bring up another bar graph here that will tell us variations and differences among different companies here. Lotte Group, as you can see, they have the largest portion for non-permanent workers. And it really, this variation comes from the differences in industry. For example, manufacturing industries where you have production lines and so on, you really need skilled workers accumulating their skills continuously. So they tend to have a smaller portion of non-permanent workers and then a bigger portion for permanent workers. That's what you seem to be seeing here. LG, Hyundai Motor, and Samsung, with their emphasis on manufacturing, they seem to show that. Lotte's case, they're more into retail business and where you can actually afford to have more flexibility, meaning a higher portion of non-permanent employers. So overall, the numbers seem to be showing that the Korea's chaebol seems to be cooperating with the government in terms of government's desire to have more permanent workers. That's what I'm reading here.
Now, going back to today's headlines of Korea's leading businesses not hiring as many women as men, let's go beyond the average rate. I mean, while Korea's leading businesses, have been generally slower in hiring women, I'm sure there are differences depending on which business groups, in which sectors we're talking about.
That is a very important point. Let's bring up the numbers for different corporations and different business groups here, and they will tell us different stories here. Lotte's case, for instance, where they have lots of retail and hiring women more and faster, well, that's exactly what you see on the left side here. Actually, Lotte Group has the largest portion of female workforce. They have, with this change, 1% increase between year 2012 and 2013, now they have more than half of employees who are female workers working in this group here, 50.4% to be exact. And look at those different companies, depending on the areas where they're operating. For instance, Hyundai Heavy and POSCO, well, actually, their portion of female workforce is about 6%, and they're increasing their female workforce here, so that is a good news. Hyundai Motors case, their female workforce is about 4.7%, and they're not increasing. Actually, it has decreased a little bit. Samsung's case, Chairman Lee Geun-hee has made it very clear that he has a strong willingness to see female workforce growing faster, but that's not what this number seems to be showing here. So a little bit of disappointment for the chairman himself. And other areas like SK, for instance, being in the service business, they have about 33% female workforce here, but they have decreased, within that period of time that we're showing here. And LG's case, they have about 21% of female workforce working there, and during that particular time, they have decreased female workforce right there. So all really different story depending on which companies you're talking about.
Definitely, and really briefly, because of the lack of time,
Right.
I suppose the long-term outlook in this issue has to be that the lagging rates will eventually need to pick up. Right?
I agree. The female workforce overall ratio will continue to increase for sure, but we cannot require these companies to have the same kind of ratio growth altogether. That's not realistic. It really depends on their business areas, the company styles and all that kind of stuff. So with these variations, we will definitely see these female workforce growing faster in the future.
Definitely. Let's hope that. All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, thank you so much for that very great talk today, and we will talk to you tomorrow.
Okay.
All right, on that note, that is all from me at this hour. Thank you for watching. I'll be back with early edition at 6 p.m. Korea time.